My name is Ramona Khan, and I will be your moderator for tonight's meeting. Before we begin, I have some important ground rules to share. You have been muted upon entry and will remain muted unless you've been called to speak. The members of the Wage Board are unmuted so they can speak at any time. Any distracting video will be disabled. Please note that today's meeting is being recorded. At this time, I am pleased to welcome and introduce the Wage Board Chair, Brenda McDuffie, who will now start the meeting. Madam Chair, you may begin.
Thank you so much, Ms. Khan, and good evening, or really it's afternoon on New Year's Eve, and I'd like to welcome you to the Farm Laborers Wage Board meeting. As was noted, my name is Brenda McDuffie, and I would again like to give my thanks to Commissioner Reardon for the opportunity to serve as the chair of the Wage Board. And I'd like to welcome all of you for again taking your time to be in attendance at this meeting this evening. I'd like to introduce, for those of you who don't know my fellow board members, representing the Farm Bureau, we have Mr. David Fisher. Good evening, David. And representing the New York State AFL-CIO, we have Mr. Dennis Hughes. Good evening, Dennis. I'd like to also acknowledge our wonderful staff support from the Department of Labor. And we have Mike Pigliano Longa, Deputy Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner for the department, Deputy Counsel for the department. And we have Deputy Commissioner Milan Blott, who is with the Worker Protection section of the department. And they have been obviously very helpful throughout this entire process and have been there to support, answer questions, get more information, and do whatever is necessary to make sure this board had the information that it needed to move ahead in its deliberations. As was stated earlier, we'd like to remind you of some important information. We're conducting simultaneous translation during the meeting. And so I would ask that everyone who does speak, my fellow board members, to speak slowly to assist our translators in keeping up with us. Today's meeting is an open public meeting, and it is being recorded. The recordings will be available on the Department of Labor's website, and that website is labor.ny.gov. You can find more detail on the work of the Wage Board on that website also. And at this point in time in our deliberations, we are not hearing any additional public testimony. We have received it and we closed it as of October 31st of this year, 2020. Transcripts and of the testimony will be available soon in both English and Spanish on the department's website. And members of the board have each been provided with copies of the written submissions for their consideration. So we've received all the materials. I would like to begin this evening's meeting with a short recap of our efforts to date this year. Since February, we've held 5 public hearings, 1 in person, and the rest 4 virtually. We also had several meetings to discuss the information received by the board. Throughout this process, we've heard and received testimony from farmers, farm workers, as well as advocates on their behalf. It is clear, I believe, to all of us that action is needed. We must protect the tens of thousands of farm workers and bring them more in line with other industries. We must also protect farms and farmers who are responsible for feeding millions of New Yorkers and generating billions of dollars as part of the New York State economy. The legislation that brought forth this board together began the process, and both my fellow board members have acknowledged the need for positive change. However, after careful and extensive review of the testimony, it's clear to me that more time is needed before the overtime threshold can be reduced below the current level of 60 hours. So at this time, I therefore would like to make a motion for consideration this evening to adopt the following report and recommendations, which I will now read into the record. The Farm Laborers Wage Board has held 4 virtual public hearings and 1 in-person hearing. We have heard from farm workers about the importance of their work and the need to continue to assure for pay and benefits that reflect the important contributions to society, their important contributions to society. And we have, excuse me, and we have considered overtime rates in similarly situated industries in New York State. We have also heard from many farmers that their markets have been disrupted. They don't know how to plan for next year's harvest, and there is tremendous uncertainty in the world and in daily lives. Looking closely at the charge of this wage board, looking at the preponderance of testimony, we find that more time is needed before the overtime threshold can be reduced below its current level. Commissioner Reardon's charge to this board was as follows. The task of this Farm Laborers Wage Board is narrowly focused on the issue of overtime, and specifically, your charge is as follows. The board shall make recommendations for overtime work for farm laborers that shall not be in excess of 60 hours. The board shall consider the extent to which overtime hours can be lowered below the 60 hours set in the law, and the board may provide for a series of successive lower overtime work thresholds and phase-in dates as part of its determinations. Your task, the board's task, is to engage in meaningful inquiry focused on these workers, on this industry, and the underlying state policy and legislative purpose. As you receive public testimony, I encourage you to take this opportunity to ask questions and engage those who testify to identify what you can about these workers, this industry, and about overtime standards more generally. In order to fulfill its charge, this board finds it requires more information that will help support a sound decision that does not cause disruption in the production of our food and assures that farm worker wages and other conditions continue to reflect those in similarly situated industries. Given the importance of food production in New York State and the extenuating circumstances and market disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic on our state's food system, we find that additional data are needed to understand the impact of lowering the overtime threshold for farm laborers. Towards that end, the board adopts the following. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the unprecedented challenges impacting both the agricultural industry and the global economy, and taking into consideration overtime rates in similarly situated industries in New York State, nearly all of which are currently set at 40 hours for non-residential workers, I move that this board recommend and report that the overtime rates for farm laborers remain at 60 hours for at least 1 year, and that the commissioner reconvene further wage board proceedings in accordance with labor law no sooner than November 1st, 2021, and no later than December 15th, 2021. That is the motion that I'm putting before the board. Do I have a second to adopt this report and its recommendations?
I second.
I have a second from Mr. Fisher. Is there discussion from my fellow board members?
Well,
Dennis?
I have a number of comments.
Okay, thank you.
Let me start with saying that I think that we've had sufficient information. I've taken the time, I know that Madam Chair, you have, and David, you have as well, to read all the testimony, and there is a tremendous amount of testimony. So I think it's a waste. Would be a waste of everyone's time that participated in this to stretch this decision out another year. It would be an affront to all those complying employers who are feeling the pain of this COVID-19 lockdown tragedy, an affront to those employers who comply with 40 hours, those people that are involved in the food industry, that process food, cook food, sell food, serve food, the restaurant industry, all the others involved in this, for us to postpone this. So I would like to propose an amendment to the resolution on the floor. I propose that a decision on this to reduce, not a decision, reducing the overtime rate be put off for 2 years. And after a 2-year period of time, the rate of overtime be reduced by 2.5 hours every year until January 1, 2030. That gives 2 years of a moratorium on any action and 8 years for the industry, the agricultural industry, to adjust to the change in the overtime. And that would represent a 30-year span of time from the beginning of this process to look at the needs of farm workers and farmers and the agricultural industry and how they entwine. 30 years before that threshold has been changed to 40 hours. So with that, I would like to entertain a motion, not entertain this motion, entertain a amendment to the motion on the floor.
Is there a second to that amendment at this time?
I can't second my own.
I know you can't. Would it be up to David or myself? Hearing none, I don't have a second on the motion, so the current motion that's on the floor has been moved and seconded. And is there any further discussion?
Again, I think it is a waste of time. I think we have enough information. And I think it is, what we really did here is provide false hope to those workers who thought that we would come to some resolution on their threshold for overtime. And for me personally, it's very disappointing that we have walked away from a resolution. And I hope that this whole exercise has not been in vain.
I can assure you that my feeling, as well as my review of all the information, as you have done, my sense is that, and I hope I can assure you, that it has absolutely not been in vain. I think that we clearly are in a unprecedented period. None of us has any certainty about whether or not we're going to come out of this period and when it's going to happen. And I think there's too much unknown about that matter. And I think I see you shaking your head, Dennis, that we would
Well,
agree that
I happen to agree, Madam Chair, that a moratorium is necessary during this COVID-19 crisis. But there is indication that this is not going to last forever.
exactly. And we all are very hopeful of that it won't last forever. And I think within your resolution, you were looking at a 2-year period, and then ultimately a move towards a time period in which we would potentially lower
Get to the 40 hours,
get to the 40 hours. And I don't think,
8 years.
yes, and I did not have any objection to what you propose. I think it is, something that could be considered once we come back and look at additional information and see where we are as a nation, really, relative to the impact of COVID. So I think there is at least agreement on the pause. And there is a sentiment, at least I have um, expressed, that I also believe that there is something that needs to be done. I just don't think the time in which we can do it um, is at this point in time, given the extenuating circumstances. So
I appreciate your point of view.
yes, no, and I thank you for yours. Um, is there any further discussion?
I would just like to say, I think we need those who are going to make these decisions going forward, and this is not the time to do that. We need the opportunity to talk to some of the workers and get more input. So I feel like, and I would have this year invite you out to some farms and see, what goes on and see more behind the scenes. I think those things are needed before decisions are made. And like Brenda said, we don't know what the economy is going to be in the next few years or where we're going to be at. So I think this is an appropriate, and I don't view it as kicking the can down the road.
Yeah. I think this will give us the time because, like you, Dennis and David, I do want to hear more from workers. And I do want to have the opportunity, as we're guiding our deliberation, to also talk to some farmers. I know we've heard testimony, um, but as I said early, it's hard for a farm worker to come and stand in front of their employer or for anyone and say, here are, everything is terrible or everything is great. And I think, and I've asked the Department of Labor staff, and I know they will find a way in which we can allow that voice and those voices to be heard so that individuals will not be targeted or have any reprimand that would, in fact, potentially hurt them or their families in terms of their livelihood. So I think this period of time will give us what we need to have that process in place, to look at the economic data from this period that we've just gone through, to look at wage information during this period, and to see where we are in terms of coming out of this pandemic. And I fully expect that at that period of time when we reconvene, that we will be able to hopefully come to a conclusion and be able to take into account those things that will allow us to move forward in terms of lowering that hourly wage before overtime is paid. So with that, if there's no further discussion, I would like a vote on the motion. David, how do you vote?
vote yes.
Okay. Dennis, how do you vote?
I vote no.
Okay. I vote in favor, and therefore the vote is carried. We have 2 that voted affirmatively and 1 opposed. Is there any further discussion or comments before we conclude today's meeting?
No.
Okay, thank you. This concludes our meeting for today. I'd like to remind you that all materials related to today's event will be posted on the Department of Labor's website. I'd like to also especially thank David and Dennis and their teams and the teams of the Department of Labor and the Department of Ags and Markets. And to all of you, I'd like to really say thank you for the time, effort, for the information that you have shared, your expertise and knowledge, your passion about this issue and the importance of it to everyone concerned is evident in the amount of testimony we've heard, in the number of people who continue to take the time to be a part of these deliberations. And to everyone, I think we've all expressed that we're very hopeful that everyone will remain safe, remain healthy, and that we can look forward to a brighter 2021 in which this board will be able to see the New York State and our global economy come out of this pandemic and be able to move forward relative to the issues that we're considering today, as well as the issues that have affected all of us. So I will say Happy New Year. I look forward to working with you in 2021. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Happy
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Please stay safe and stay well.